Today I'm going to show you how you can make a reed following the earliest instructions that we have on reed making for bassoon. That is a treatise by Ozi from 1803, that's the second edition. In the back of his treatise he tells us how he thinks you should make reeds. This is the book. A little later, Jacob Fröhlich writes also instructions in his method as a little later, I think 1829. But these are the earliest sources that we have. What you need is a bed like this to put a piece of cane in. It needs to have the rounding of a piece of cane. You can buy that. I bought this one from Leslie Ross, who makes beautiful ones, but you can make it yourself with a gouge or have somebody else make it for you. One of those, really sharp knife like this. I use these break knives. I'm going to use a shaper. Ozi and Fröhlich obviously didn't use a shaper, but I know exactly the shape that I want, so I'm going to use my own shaper. Very important, this is a scraper. You're going to use it like this to take away material from the inside of the cane. Fröhlich describes what he uses. He says he uses a metal button that is sharpened on one side, and he uses that as a scraper. I also have one of those. They're really helpful. You probably can do it without, but it's much more precise doing it this way. The reed that we are going to make looks like this. I don't know if you can see it, but up to there, there's bark, and the rest is scraped. Maybe you can see it looks like this. It doesn't have much of a shape. It's just quite flat, and in fact, it works pretty well. It's a nice crow. Made it this morning. All right, let's start. The material that you need needs to have a thickness of 1.1 millimeters. Ozi describes it as half a ligne. Ligne was an old French measurement and stands for 2.2 millimeters. So half a ligne is 1.1. You can obviously gouge it by hand, so you divide this in 4 and then take it out with a gouge. I gouged it on a machine, 1.1, which gives exactly the same result. Then what Ozi and Fröhlich both say is you leave the sides 1.1, because if you make it thinner, it's not strong enough to form the tube. But the middle section should be thinner, because if it's too thick, you can't fold it. It will break. Fröhlich is quite precise about this. He says you should divide the piece of cane in 4 sections. I'm going to do that. First I'm going to write down what the middle is. So this piece is 14 centimeters, so the middle is 7. And I want the first wire on 3.3. So I put a stripe there as well, and on the other side as well. So I divide it in 4 sections, like this. And then Fröhlich says, and that's a very good tip, cut a tiny little piece from the side in the middle, so then you know where the middle is, because in the inside you will lose a stripe constantly because you are scraping away. Is this actually a real one? Yeah, 7, perfect. interesting to notice that neither of them is describing any sloping down. They say these both thick 1.1 and the middle sections 2 and 3 should be thinner. They don't say it has to go gradually down. So I'm going to make it, I'm going to follow that, and I'm going to make that thinner to probably 0.7, 0.6, something like that. So I put my thumb on the place where the first wire should be, where I don't want it to be thinner. I'm going to remove the inside, like this. In fact, it's quite simple work. Oh yeah, one interesting thing also to tell you is that Ozi doesn't write anywhere that this in this stage the wood should be wet. So I'm using dry cane. So in the end I'm going to take a little bit more from the middle, just to make sure that will not be the tip because you cut it off, but to make sure that it's not too thick in the middle, otherwise it won't fold. So let's see how thick it is. Oh, it's still very thick. It's still 0.9. So we need to come down. Okay, other side. Of course, it's important that this bed really fits well, otherwise it will crack when you put the pressure on. Seven. That's slowly getting there. The other side, always do it on two sides because otherwise you start off being out of balance. Alright, measure again. Yeah, that's good. This, the right side is now a little thicker than the other side in the middle. The left side is 0.6 millimeters and that was 0.7. Okay, now I'm going to check the rest of the read. Yeah, that's pretty equal. That's not bad. So the next step is to sandpaper it absolutely smooth. I don't know if you can see it, but it's quite rough now because of that. So I take this rough sandpaper, put it around my finger and make it even. Oops. Come back. Okay, and then I'm going to use the smooth sandpaper to make it really nice and without any bumps. So turn it around. Alright, that looks good. The last step that they describe is to make a little scoring in the middle to help it fold. So I'm going to do that with my sharp knife. Do it a few times. No pressure because it's reasonably thin already. Okay, that looks good. And then they say from this moment you should soak it. So I'm going to do that like 15 minutes or 20 minutes in lukewarm water. Alright, wet. Now we're going to fold it. Again, I don't really have a nice, this is edge, so let's hope this will not crack. Like this. So there's still bark everywhere. Let's shape it. So with the light I make sure that it's nicely in the middle. So make sure that it's perfect. Alright, that looks good. So they don't mention anywhere beveling, taking these edges away, but I still do it because otherwise it might not fit, so I'll be stubborn and do my own thing. Then they do write about making these cracks. So about 7 or something. Make sure that you put your finger on it because then they can't shoot through. Where is my missing? So 3 pieces of, I use 0.7, but maybe 0.6 will also work. Right, now I need to know where 3.3 is because it's gone again. And that's why I'm going to put my first wire. Make it as tight as you can. Okay, second wire. Ozi and Fro didn't have or didn't use messing wire like this. They describe using steel or a messing band. So it's not completely clear how they use it, but if you look at original reeds, they have that. It's like one ring of a little thicker metal that they fold around it. But I don't have that, and this also works. Alright, looks like this. Pretty good. Then the most tricky thing is, of course, just putting this up. It's not completely together. You see that? I'll just cut this. So put the mango in very carefully. Like this. And put the third wire here. So make this nice and round, really tight, really crack it. Like this. Right, so we now have a blank that has all the bark still on it. Okay, there we go again. It is interesting to notice that neither Hlich or Ozi says that we should let the reed rest. It's just like oboe, they seem to keep going in the process. So oboe players also don't have this thing of leaving it for a few days. This is an interesting and tricky process. You have to really get used to it. What they describe is to hold the reed like this, just like sharpening a pen with a penknife. And if you look that up in the Encyclopedia of Diderot, penknives, then it is this movement towards you. And it's interesting that they use for this a different verb than scraping, what you would do later. It's cutting. It's different from scraping. He uses a different verb for that. He says that you should start taking the bark away 5 lineages away from the first wire. So this is the first wire, and 5 lineages is 11 millimeters. So I'm going to write that down, 11 millimeters. That is here, and also on the other side. Like this. Like this. And so the difficult thing is that I'm not going to scrape, I'm going to make this really sharp, because I really need it sharp. So take off that. That we're not going to scrape, but that we are really going to cut. And that is really a new feeling. So I'm going in a tiny little bit, and I'm like really cutting away rather than scraping. And when you do that, you get better at it. After all. Like this. And so it's really in slices. I hope you can see it like this. And you can only do that with a very sharp knife. So, other side. This material is really hard. And I never understood this step really, but when you look at how they do pen knives, like feather pens, all of a sudden becomes clear. The final tip is not so important because you're going to cut that off anyway. Like this, yeah. There's a little bit that is still. Come on. A little bit here at the tip that doesn't want to go off, but I'm careful not to crack it. Yeah, that goes. Yeah, like this. Okay, now it looks like this. A little bit cut off the tip. That's not so good, but I'll take it away. Okay, now make it the length of the reed I want to have. Look at the other one. It's like this. So cut open the tip. Like this. And you see that it looks already like a reed. Okay. Now I'm going to try to close the tip a little bit by making the second wire rounder and adjusting the first wire. Yeah, closed. Let's see if it gives me a crow. Yes, it does. Obviously it's still too thick, but it's not a bad start. Okay, let's see what it does on the instrument. This is going to be a Baroque Bassoon reed, so let's try. You hear it's still quite heavy, but this is without having done any scraping to it. This is just the inside, and I polished it a little bit. I can do a little bit more, because he also describes that you have to be very careful with putting in a plaque, because it's very hard material, so it's easy to crack. So they describe polishing it now, make sure that it's absolutely smooth, and then Ozi says that you should finish this with a piece of glass. Now, I don't have a piece of glass at the moment, but I normally use the back of my knife for that, to do the final polishing. In fact, when you do that, it's probably difficult for you to see, but the reed starts to shine. And that's the sign that it's right. So the tip is still nicely in balance. And then Ozi says that you should take away from the tip and then the sides upwards a bit. So that's what I'm going to do. By doing that, the whole reed will become lighter and easy to play. So like this. And then probably after this I'm going to leave it and see what it does tomorrow. But you see that in like an hour and a half you can actually make a reed without having it let it rest for a few days. The good thing with this way of making reeds is that you don't need an expensive profiler, and you can decide completely yourself how thick you want to have the cane by scraping it by hand. So you're very much in charge. And nice low B flat. In fact, all the B flats work. It's quite rough in sound, so I'm going to make the second wire a little rounder to make it a little darker and adjust it with the first wire. So you see that in this way you can make, in an hour and a half, from scratch, a reed that actually plays on the first day. I hope all of this was clear, and go for it.